The most feared man in prison. There are some really scary people on this creepy planet. These are individuals who killed countless people and committed heinous crimes before the law was able to stop them. Prisons have a reputation for being frightening places, and not just because of the harsh living conditions the inmates suffer. However, the acts that the prisoners themselves commit make them even more terrifying. There are some of the most dangerous inmates in the world who are serving time for their heinous crimes. Among them, we have listed the top 10 most feared men in prison. Number 1. John Wayne Gacy. American serial killer and sex offender John Wayne Gacy was responsible for the rape, torture, and murder of at least 33 boys and men. Gacy frequently performed as Pogo the Clown or Patches the Clown, two personalities he created at charitable events and children's hospitals. Prior to the uncovering of his crimes, he performed public services and earned a nickname Killer Clown. All of Gacy's murders were carried out inside his ranch-style home in suburban Chicago. He would usually lure a victim to his house and trick them into donning handcuffs to the pretext of showing him a magic trick. He would then torture and rape his victim before killing them by asphyxiation or strangulation by garroting them. 13 more victims were buried somewhere on his property, while 4 bodies were dumped in the Des Plaines River. 26 victims were buried in the crossface of his house. His conviction of 33 murders at the time was the greatest in U.S. judicial history. On March 13, 1980, Gacy was sentenced to death. He spent a lot of time painting while on death row at Menard Correctional Center. On May 10, 1994, he was killed by lethal injection at the Stateville Correctional Center. Number 2. Thomas Silverstein. Thomas Edward Silverstein was a criminal from the United States who spent the remaining 42 years of his life in prison after being convicted of 4 different murders while imprisoned for armed robbery, one of which was overturned. Silverstein spent the last 36 years of his life in solitary confinement at the Marion Penitentiary in Illinois for the murder of corrections officers Morel Klutz. He was described by prison officials as a brutal killer and former commander of the Aryan Brotherhood prison group. Silverstein maintained that the degrading conditions in the prison system contributed to his 3 murders. He was being kept in a specially built cell on Range 13 at the ADX Florence Federal Penitentiary in Colorado. At the time of his death, he was the Bureau of Prisons' longest-held prisoner in solitary confinement. Many jail guards refused to speak with Silverstein out of respect for Klutz. This is why he is the most dangerous prisoner of his time. Number 3. Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, popularly known as the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster, was an American serial killer and sex offender who murdered and dismembered of 17 men and boys between 1978 and 1991. Many of his later crimes involved necrophilia, cannibalism, and the permanent preservation of body parts, usually all or part of the skeleton. Despite being diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, and a psychotic condition, Dahmer was found to be legally sane at his trial. On February 17, 1992, he was convicted of 15 of the 16 murders he committed in Wisconsin and sentenced to 15 terms of life imprisonment. Dahmer was later sentenced to a 16th life sentence for another crime that occurred in Ohio in 1978. Dahmer was beaten to death on November 28, 1994 by Christopher Scarver, a fellow inmate at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. Number 4. Nico Jenkins. Nico Allen Jenkins, also known as Nicholas, was an American serial killer who was convicted of 4 killings in Omaha, Nebraska in August 2013. The murders occurred less than a month after he was released from jail after serving 10.5 years of the 18-year term he received for carjacking conducted at the age of 15 and assaults committed in prison. Jenkins' criminal record began at the age of 15 when he was charged with carjacking and aggravated assault. Later, Jenkins was arrested on an unrelated allegation of terroristic threats. The proceedings against Jenkins began once he was declared competent to face trial. Jenkins claimed throughout the trial that he operates on Apopus's orders. His courtroom antics included speaking in tongues, wailing, and laughing when prosecutors recounted the details of his victims' deaths. In May 2017, he was convicted of the 4 murders and sentenced to death. Number 5. BTK Killer. Dennis Lynn Rader is an American serial killer known as the BTK Strangler or the BTK Killer. BTK means blind, torture, kill. This is coined by himself. He murdered 10 people in Wichita and Park City, Kansas between 1974 and 1991. He sent taunting letters to police and media outlets describing his crimes. Rader started sending letters after a decade gap in 2004, resulting in his arrest and subsequent guilty plea in 2005. He is currently in prison at the El Dorado Correctional Facility for 10 consecutive life sentences. Rader had horrific sexual fantasies about torturing trapped and helpless women since he was a child. He also practiced zoo sadism by torturing, killing, and hanging small animals. Rader acted out voyeurism, autoerotic asphyxiation, and cross-dressing sexual fetishes. He frequently spied on female neighbors while dressed in women's attire, including stolen women's undergarments, and masturbated with ropes or other binds around his arms and neck. Number 6. The Dating Game Killer. Rodney James Alcala was an American serial killer and sex offender who was sentenced to death in California for 5 murders committed in the state between 1977 and 1979 and received an additional 25-year sentence for 2 homicides committed in New York in 1971 and 1977 after pleading guilty to both. While he has been definitely linked to 8 killings, Alcala's total number of victims remains unknown and could be far higher. Police believe the true number could be as high as 130. Alcala collected a collection of over 1,000 images of women, adolescent girls, and boys, many of whom were in sexually explicit situations, and authorities have speculated that others may have been rape or murder victims as well. Number 7. Aileen Wuornos. This woman was nothing less than a monster. Aileen Carol Wuornos was a serial killer from the United States. In 1989 and 1990, while engaged in street prostitution along Florida's highways, she killed and robbed 7 of her male clients. She used to claim the men she dated raped her and then shoot them at point-blank range, and she claimed that those murders were committed in self-defense. Wuornos was sentenced to death for 6 of the murders and was killed by lethal injection on October 9, 2002, following 12 years on Florida's death row. In the biographical film Monster in 2003, Wuornos' story was told, beginning with her first murder and ending with her execution. Charlize Theron received the Academy Award for Best Actress for her role as Wuornos. Number 8. Charles Bronson. Charles Arthur Salvador, better known as Charles Bronson, is a British criminal who has been described in the British press as the most violent prisoner in Britain and Britain's most notorious prisoner. He has spent time detained in the high-security psychiatric hospitals of Rampton, Broadmoor, and Ashworth. He was arrested as a petty criminal at first, but was convicted and sentenced to 7 years in jail for armed robbery in 1974. Because of attacks on prisoners and guards, additional time was added. When he was released in 1987, he launched a bare-knuckle boxing career in London's East End. He was returned to prison in 1988 after being convicted of preparing another heist. He is known as a violent inmate who has taken multiple hostages during fights with guards, resulting in his sentence being extended to life imprisonment. Number 9. Pascal Payet. Pascal Payet is a French criminal known for his audacious prison escapes through hijacked helicopters. He was first sentenced to 30 years in prison for a murder committed during a security van robbery in 1997. Payet was born in Montpellier, France, and spent his childhood in Lyon before moving to Marseille. He was convicted of aggravated assault in 1988 and conspiracy in 1993. On November 20th, 1997, he took part on an attack on Banque de France armored car in Salon de Provence, which resulted in the death of a guard. In January 1999, he was arrested alongside Eric Alborio in Paris. Payet was one of France's most closely watched prisoners, and he was never held in the same prison for more than 6 months. Number 10. Alfred George Hines. Alfred George Hines was a British criminal who escaped from 3 high-security prisons while serving a 12-year prison sentence for robbery. Despite the fact that 13 of his appeals to higher courts were dismissed, he was eventually able to get a pardon through his expertise in the British legal system. Hines grew up in a children's home after his father died as a thief while undergoing 10 lashes as a form of corporal punishment for armed theft, before fleeing at the age of 7. He was eventually imprisoned for minor theft and escaped from a Borstal institution for young delinquents. Following his arrest, Hines filed a complaint against authorities, accusing the prison commissioners of wrongful detention, and used the occasion to plot his next escape. First, Hines escaped from Nottingham prison by sneaking through locked doors and climbing a 20-foot prison wall. And the next time, Hines was carried to the bathroom by 2 guards, but when they released his handcuffs, he bundled them into the cubicle and snapped the padlock into screw eyes that his accomplices had previously fastened to the door. He escaped into the mob on Fleet Street, but was caught 5 hours later at an airport. There are a lot of dangerous prisoners in the world, Thomas Silverstein, an American criminal, was the most dangerous and solitary in prison prisoner. Pascal Payet, a French criminal and the world's most dangerous prisoner, attempted to escape twice with the use of a helicopter. But no matter what they did, they never made it to the end. They were eventually caught. And that brings us to the end of this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. Thank you for your time, and see you in the next video.